Another video you've been asking me about, the JBL Charge 5 versus the JBL Xtreme 3. How close can it get? Is it a mini Xtreme in the making? And then I thought, well, if I'm doing Charge 5 against the Xtreme 3, let's throw in the JBL Xtreme 2 and see how they all get on. And then I thought, hang on, why don't we throw in the JBL Xtreme 1 and see how the JBL Charge 5 does against the whole generation of speakers. JBL Charge 5 versus all three JBL Xtremes. Because at the end of the day, people still like all of these speakers. Each JBL Xtreme has not really been so much as an improvement as a change in the overall sound signature. We've gone from huge, massive upper bass, but we ain't got no deep bass, to we've got a bit more deep bass, not quite so much upper bass, got not much upper bass at all. We've got lots of boom, 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 low down deep bass. Just how do they compare? Well, on paper, we've got one thing to remember, of course, with the JBL Xtreme range is you stick the power lead in, it will go louder. JBL Charge 5, with or without the power lead, you've got 40 watts of power. You've got 30 watts to the woofer. You've got, by the way, a separate woofer, separate tweeter. I'm assuming by now you've seen other videos on these speakers, even if it's not from me, and you've got a handle. So just to say, woofer, tweeter, mono, 30 watts woofer, 10 watts tweeter. But power leads, you've got to stick the power lead in to get the full 40 watts of the JBL Xtreme 1, the full 40 watts of the JBL Xtreme 2, and the full 50 watts of the JBL Xtreme 3. Now, they have leaked at some point that basically with 30 watts on the JBL Xtreme 1 and the JBL Xtreme 2, if you don't plug the lead in, and in fact, when we first got the JBL Xtreme 2, we were disappointed because it seemed, well, they actually said early on in the manual, it's 20 watts on battery only, but we got a firmware upgrade, 30 watts on battery. I don't know, I'm guessing 40 watts, but it's only a guess. All we know for sure, with the power lead in, 50, 40, 40, 40. Is this a mini JBL Xtreme 3 in the, or mini JBL Xtreme 3.5 or 2.5 in the making? Just to remind you, 6 years, almost 6 years since the JBL Xtreme 1 hits our lives. July 2015. It only seems like yesterday that one of the first speakers to give us what we thought at the time was, oh, boom, 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 we've got proper bass. Now we know, yeah, but actually we didn't get much deep bass with that. And then April 2018 came out the JBL Xtreme 2. October 2020 for the JBL Xtreme 3. Then, oh, it's the brand new kid on the block. It's February 21 for the £160. So we're talking Xtreme speakers, still talking Xtreme prices, even for the Charge 5, £160, £280. SBC codec, all of them, by the way. Oh, and by the way, something I've not been mentioning, because I've assumed most of these, you know, will default to AAC on your Apple devices. Craig Ivor, he did point out to me, actually, by the way, Alan, he said, the Xtreme 3 will default to AAC on Apple devices, which I'll assume they were doing anyway. Now I've looked into it, because I have no Apple devices. I will never have Apple devices. I'm not getting locked into that ecosystem, but you love your devices. That's really good. By the way, still SBC, I assume, because there's no AAC Xtreme 1 or Xtreme 2. And that does make a big difference, because SBC on iOS, not the greatest of codecs. I mean, it's only a basic codec on Android. But AAC, got to remember, can actually be lossless. If your tracks are encoded into AAC, you've got the potential of having lossless Bluetooth there. Of course, smallest battery, 27 watt hours, around 36 watt hours, not exactly, but for the JBL Xtremes, around 36 watt hours, 27 watt hours. We went Bluetooth 4.1, we went Bluetooth 4.2, we went Bluetooth 5.1, and indeed Bluetooth 5.1. Just to point out, partly boost. You've got to have the same speaker pairing system to be able to pair them. So when we've got Connect will only connect to Connect. Connect Plus for Xtreme 2 will only connect to Connect Plus. And partly boost, these two speakers will connect together. USB-C for JBL Xtreme 3, and indeed the Charge 5. And they are all IPX7, except for the very, very old man on the block. JBL Xtreme 1 is IPX5, so it's only splash proof, not submergible. Tweeters. all got tweeters except the JBL Xtreme 1, and we'll all do about 4 hours maximum battery. But as I keep saying, this battery life, well overdone. A lot of you, you're just too much into it. Comparing, and actually a lot, it surprises me how many you actually believe headline specs, 20 hours, 24 hours. No, 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 no. And that's going to be with battery management at low volume, tested with low bass tracks. No, 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 no. Just go by the actual battery capacity, and then know if it goes louder, less battery life, more bass, less battery life. All of these are about 4 hours. Let's have a listen. Well, I will give you the weights because it is interesting, because the JBL Xtreme 2 is actually the heaviest one here. We got neodymium magnets, so it got lighter in the JBL Xtreme 3, so under 2 kilos Xtreme 3, 2.4 kilos Xtreme 2, 2.1 kilos Xtreme 1, and just under a kilo for the JBL Charge 5. So low volume, and I'm doing a low volume because for me, this is where this speaker excels. Low volume, where it's still dynamic, still very, very clear, cuts through in terms of clarity of the track, and just has enough bass where you start to get some resonance at low volume without having, you know, well, obviously it's low volume, you're not pushing the volume. Yeah, that's obvious. But normally you push the volume to get some bass. You do get some bass at low volume, and the point being, it's balanced. It's not overblown as it can be when they've done bass adjustments for low volume. So low volume, 40%. Comparing them all, I'm going to go through them. When I do the comparison, it's going to be one after the other. So don't switch off thinking, well, he's only doing the Xtreme 1 or the Xtreme 2. It's going to be consecutive. Charge 5 against the JBL Xtreme 1. It is a bit of a thinner sound. Of course, it's a smaller sound than all of them. Bigger drivers, bigger speakers. You do hear that to your ears, even if you don't hear it in my tracks. Well, hopefully you will if you use decent headphones. But the Charge 5 does sound a bit thinner than the JBL Xtreme 1. But here's a kicker. It's actually got deeper bass on the JBL 5. Massive, massive boost on the upper bass, to the extent that we're actually 6 decibels up in terms of deep bass, 30 to 65 hertz, completely missing on the Xtreme 1. But it hides it well because it's got the massive upper bass boost. So a lot of people do like that, but a lot of people don't like that. It's going to be a matter of taste. So lots of upper bass punch, but you get some deep resonance, and you hear things you won't hear, but you might not want to hear anyway on the JBL Xtreme 1. Weirdly, against the Xtreme 2, in many ways, very, very similar at these low volumes. But the Xtreme 1, the Xtreme 2 is really something between the other two extremes. And it actually ends up being quite a reasonable match with the JBL Charge 5. There's the obvious, but it's only small obvious. So it is brighter, that's obvious, and it's a bit thinner, but it's only a bit thinner. There's a bit more deep bass on the Xtreme 2, but it's only a little bit more deep bass. And it's a bigger sound, but only a little bit. So there's all those things you would expect from the difference in sizes, but it's quite small at these low volumes to almost be insignificant, because the Charge 5 is brighter at the end of the day, and that may be great for your low volume listening. The Xtreme 2 has, as I said, a sound that's in between the Xtreme 1 and the Xtreme 3, and of course that means less upper bass. But for deep bass, there's only one speaker on the table that does proper deep bass with a rumble, big rounded deep bass. That's the JBL Xtreme 3. But then you don't get the upper bass punch. So that's why all three speakers seem still to suit people with different ears, which I suppose from their point of view is great. Although, did I mention the prices? I see up to now you could still buy the Xtreme 1, but today I saw you couldn't. Although if you go on eBay and look for some of those, never opened, blah, 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 you can get the Xtreme 1 for around 120 quid. So about £170 for the Xtreme 2. £280, but I know I did mention that for the Xtreme 3. So by at least 3 decibels, more deep bass. So that's really, really significant. And indeed, it's the most dynamic speaker at these volumes, but it has the least upper bass, and that's why it's really weird how they've made the sound signature different on each JBL Xtreme. So normally you'd expect to get some sort of subtle changes on the same model line, but that's not been the case with the JBL Xtremes. Still get people arguing which was the best one, and that's why different sound signatures on each of them. That's why for some people the Xtreme 1 still holds sway, even though it's got no deep bass, because they love the upper bass punch outside. That's going to really cut through any background noises. But the Xtreme 3 against the JBL Charge 5, if that's what you're wondering, yeah, it does have way more impact on the Xtreme 3. But again, a little bit brighter on the Charge 5, and that may be what you want if you only want it for low-level listening. So let's go to proper listening levels around 80%, and with JBL, that's a sweet spot, because after 80%, they keep limiting all their speakers, and so that's the most bass you're going to get, 80%. Actually, the most dynamic speaker here in real terms is the JBL Charge 5, but it also has the obvious least amount of bass. It can hold its own in terms of mid bass just about, although it's a tad behind all three of these speakers. But it can't match them for upper bass, and it can't match them now for deep bass. Well, I'm saying that because this is where it's quite extraordinary. The JBL Xtreme one, I already mentioned it doesn't really have any deep bass, but you may not have been expecting at 80% that the JBL Charge would have 8 decibels. 8 decibels more deep bass, 30 to 65 hertz. For some people, that's crucial than the Xtreme one. So in some ways, this is looking like a mini JBL Xtreme. But then 3 decibels up in the upper bass. It has the more upper bass punch. But I found that quite surprising. 8 decibels is huge, but it is behind the other two speakers. So yeah, we already know thin, clear, aggressive, in-your-face sounding speaker. The bass goes just to the point where you start getting some resonance, but it is a narrow sound stage. You won't get a big sound from it. And for me, excels low to moderate volumes. JBL Xtreme 3, only one on the for me, only one on the table that can produce proper deep down 50 hertz type bass. Bass big, round, and has a big rumble. But a lot of you don't think that's a big deal, especially when you're paying £280. The Xtreme 2 will always be something in between these two. If you can't make your mind up whether you want upper bass or deep bass, the Xtreme 2 is something in between the two. And how does that compare to the Charge 5? Well, yes, then we're 4 decibels up in deep bass on the Xtreme 2, which, if you're going to call it JBL Xtreme speaker, it shouldn't just be about the price, it should be about the bass, shouldn't it? And then it does justify it. So it does hold its own, 80%, but just remember, it's not an Xtreme speaker. It won't have the bass. So what is the headroom on all of these speakers? I'm not going to put the power lead in, that's not very fair, because that doesn't make them a portable speaker, and you can't do that trick with the Charge 5. So on battery, maximum volume of 4 speakers.
I just see your say all the up aggressively. I've been working hard these days, homie, how you stressing me? Yeah, oh, homie, how you stressing me? You can check my stats, yeah, you can check my resume. I see y'all sitting down, all the up aggressively. I've been working hard these days, homie, how you stressing me? Yeah, oh, homie, how you stressing me? You can check my stats, yeah, you can check my resume. Cause I come like a killer, I build it up and getting iller. And the first I'm just getting realer. Yeah, that's what I do when I build my pillars, build my castle, build my house. Yeah, I really built this town, so I gotta strike them. Yeah, I gotta rap and bring them down. to bring this. Man, I really came to rep these balls, but I just gotta win this. Man, I'm up in this ring right now, I'ma take them out, you can be the witness. I get this, up on this level, I've been elevating, y'all been well, being lazy, elevating, going up. Well, I've been walking up the stairs. This life is really crazy, and it sure as hell ain't fair. But that is all okay, I'ma tell them I don't care. I just gotta keep them surfing, I just gotta be the man that's really gonna do it, that is really gonna make it. Man, I feel this gravitation in my body, man, I do it for my people now, yeah, for my nation, for my soul, and for my legacy. Cause I'm on my path and I be coming for my destiny.
So ultimately, JBL Xtreme 3 is the loudest. -15 makes it 2 decibels up on the JBL Xtreme 1, 3 decibels up on Xtreme 2. About the same for the JBL Charge 5. I'm making it last place because it doesn't have the peak of the JBL Xtreme 2. JBL Xtreme 3, the loudest, has the biggest peak, but it doesn't have the most bass. Most bass goes to Xtreme 1. How is that possible? Because it has no deep bass after its peak at 80 Hz. Well, because it's massively upper bass heavy. So much so that it's enough to overcome the deep bass, and indeed the mid bass it doesn't have. For example, -32 means Xtreme 3 has 13 decibels more deep bass, 30 to 65 Hz, but because it's quieter than the upper bass on the JBL Xtreme 1, overall -25 makes the JBL Xtreme 1 decibel louder in overall bass. It's also more dynamic at maximum volume, has half a decibel more in dynamic range. But look at that bass, completely cut off at 80 Hz, almost a mirror image of the JBL Xtreme 3, where it goes on rising to 60 Hz. So who's got it right? If we look at the original, we can see, look at those 3 little peaks in the upper bass, and then look how the deep bass is relative. It's 13 dB up on those 3 peaks. JBL Xtreme 3, actually pretty accurate to the actual bass of the track. The JBL Xtreme 1 is nowhere near it. It's all upper bass heavy, and it's not accurate to the original track. But outdoors, that is going to carry. JBL Xtreme 2, well, it's something in between the Xtreme 1 and the Xtreme 3. But it doesn't go very loud. It goes disappointingly loud, only just louder than the JBL Charge 5. But it does maintain more bass than the JBL Charge 5, which is more mids and highs. In fact, overall bass, 3 decibels up on the JBL Charge 5. So a couple of surprises for me. Well, the Charge 5 can hold its own in terms of volume against the Xtreme 2. But probably because you're not really getting much in terms of bass at maximum volume. But so surprise number 1 is it can hold its own in terms of volume if bass isn't a huge deal to you. But it's still a surprise to me that what I've been describing as something in between the 1 and the 3 doesn't go louder than it does. Doesn't even go as loud as the JBL Xtreme 1. And talk about massive surprises. Who's got the most bass? 6 years on, who's got the most bass? It's JBL Xtreme 1. But okay, it's got basically 0 deep bass. And for some people, that's going to make this an excruciating listen. But for some people, the high end on the JBL Xtreme 3 is almost unlistenable at maximum volume because of how screechy it can get, and it has that big upper frequency. Was it around 13 kilohertz? I think it was off memory. Big peak on there that can be pretty harsh. But why am I saying it's got the most bass and when it hasn't got deep bass? Well, because there's so much upper bass. If you're taking the range, that's for me. Somebody else might say bass should go up to 300 Hertz and some shouldn't go past 100 Hertz. So I'm being what I think is middle ground. 30 to 200 Hertz, I think, covers what all of us, reasonable people who've got ears at work, would say, well, that's the bass, whether you like that part of the bass or not. So by at least 3 decibels upper bass, the Xtreme 1 louder than the others. And of course, because that is the loudest part of the bass spectrum here, overall, that going to help it go louder overall. In mid-bass, it's now holding its own. So sound signatures are changing at maximum volume. Minus 32 on the Xtreme 1 is 1 decibel up on the Xtreme 2. It's the same as the Xtreme 3. So it's holding its own both at mid-bass and upper bass now. It's doing different things than it did at lower volumes. It's only when you go to the deep bass, 30 to 65 hertz, where it's massively, hugely, massively down. It's even 5 decibels down, can you believe it, on the JBL Charge 5. But no pretense of deep bass, but enough mid and upper bass to actually be the most bass heavy. But again, it's going to be your taste. Only one speaker for deep bass. So did that answer the questions? Can it hold its own against the Xtreme 3? Number one, no. It's in the terms of, it's always going to be a small sound. I don't know if you'll get that depending on what you're listening to or on with my recordings, but hopefully you'll get a sense of these sound bigger and wider. Boom, I just turned that on. And that sounds narrow. So you're not going to get an immersive listen from the speaker compared to the others. Depending on the volume, it can hold its own. But as I've been saying all along, for me, it sounds at low volume where it really, really, really does hold its own. But then it's going to be, where do you want your bass? That's why all three JBL Xtremes have a different sound signature. So I don't think it's a match. If you're a bass lover, you're still going to want, I think, one of these other JBL Xtremes. But of course, obviously, you're going to, yeah, but what if you had two of them? Well, I don't know, because I've only got one. Maybe at some point, if I win the lottery, I'll get another one, just so I can answer that question. But of course, the bass will never go deeper, even with two of them. So I'm just thinking, is that all the questions you probably wanted to know? Can it hold its own to a certain extent? But there's no simple answer against all the Xtremes, because the answer is different against each of the JBL Xtremes, which is basically the answer. But it isn't a JBL Xtreme that's been put in the wash and shrunk. It's a JBL Charge 5 at the end of the day. This is the JBL Charge 3 with a small subwoofer. That's how I think of it. It's got the exact sound signature of the Charge 3, but now has some proper bass. That's been my video. Hope you got something out of it as usual, and I thank you for watching.